I'd like to begin by many of you probably know about the two-row wampum, the Goswanta Tegni di Ohade. Some of you probably don't. So it's a good opportunity for people to be able to look at something that gives it a historical, puts it in historical context in terms of the relationship. And this is from the Haudenosaunee perspective, and that is the Six Nations and the Longhouse point of view and our traditional belief in our existence and your existence. When I say you, those of you who are non-native people. What we have is the two rows here representing the European in the tall ship, and then the Iroquois people in their canoe. And we have the river of life in the background, white representing the purity of life, representing the purity of our relationship. Now this goes back, way back in time, and this was presented to the first visitors here more than 400 years ago. It was back in a time when the European had just arrived, and the Dutch were here, the British were here, the French, even the Germans were here, the Spanish. Many different nations were here attempting to have their footprint in North America or on Turtle Island as we know it. So our ancestors knew quite well that these people weren't going to leave. So they said, we somehow have to present a way of getting an understanding of how we're going to live together, how we're going to travel the river of life together in our separate the canoe and the tall ship. So it was incumbent upon our ancestors to make that happen by coming up with this wampum belt and this way of living together. And that's true just as much today as it was over 400 years ago. The European in their tall ship represented here in one of the streams. And our ancestors in their canoe represented in the other. Each one had all of their language, all of their culture, all of the things that made them who they were in each vessel. The vessel was joined by a silver chain representing discussions, representing treaty making, representing all those things that were supposed to be followed and respected all the way through life. And that was done purposely to get an understanding that one does not cross into the other. We stay in our own vessel, you stay in your own vessel. If need be, if you need to cross over into our vessel, then we will make a treaty. We will do it by polishing the chain. And we always polish the chain continuously for as long as we exist and travel the river of life together. That was the understanding. And if you wanted to cross over, then it was done through treaty, it was done through discussion. Similarly, if we wanted to cross and get into your vessel, that's what we did. And the treaty-making process began a long time ago with this concept, this symbol, very symbolic but very true. And this is part of our history. When I say our history, prior to having any kind of boundaries, there was no North America. At the time, this land wasn't known as North America. There was no United States. There was no Canada. There were no provinces. There were no states. There were simply Haudenosaunee territory, as well as the other nations that existed here at that time. So if we did not polish that chain also, that meant it would tarnish, it would rust, it would break. When it does break, that meant war. And we came very close at times, in most recent years in 1990, in the infamous Oka situation, as people like to call it. I won't get into that, but that was a breaking point for many of us, or could have been a breaking point for many of us. So for myself, for our people, that is the beginning. And what has happened over time is that you've crossed meaning the non-native people, governments, whatever, big companies, have crossed over without asking, have crossed into our vessel, into our canoe, have disrupted, entered into our lives to the extent of stealing our children. Stealing our children. And it's time for us now to take them back. It's time for us to polish that chain again so that we can pull our children and our people back into our vessel, while understanding that the river, we will continue to live together. And at the end of, not the end, but there are strings here that you can add to, meaning that we will continue on forever and ever, and that never ends and never stops. That's where we begin. That's what we understand our relationship. And it's our responsibility to ensure and make sure people know about that. We have been neglected. We have neglected to do that, and it's time to get back to that. My good friend Noel mentioned that, it's up to us to make sure that governments and Canadians understand the relationship with the treaties out west, the type of treaties that have been implemented, and for us here in the East, these types of agreements and arrangements. It's time for us to remind our people about these things, that they are alive and well. They might be buried somewhere under tons of legislation that have come and gone over the centuries, but somebody else's legislation, not ours, that have hidden this underneath. And we've accepted that. We should accept our responsibility and stand up and begin to talk about this, not be afraid to talk about it. It's very simplistic. It's not hard to understand. And that's something I think that all people in Canada, in the United States, because it applies there also, can embrace and should embrace with very little difficulty. The difficult part is, how do we live this? How do we make this a living, breathing part of our lives? So what I am dedicated the rest of my life here on earth is to make sure that this is followed and this is understood. No longer do we want to see that chain not being polished. In other words, talking to each other, making sure that things are looked at and listened to, making sure that our younger brothers, the Canadians that are here, because they are younger than us, we've been here for so long now, that we are the elders, making sure that they understand that we, the older brothers, hold the key to our future and not look at it upon us as being burdensome, not look upon us as being a financial burden to the rest of the country, because we are not. The blunt part of all of this is that we own this land. And until that is reconciled, until that is understood, until that is acknowledged, until that is reflected in all of the things that happen in this country, then Canada will remain a landless country. And that's what it is right now. Why do you think we still have settlements? Why do you think there are land claims all over the country? Why do you think we have such a separate system in which we are looked upon? There's even within the Constitution of this country, which I had opposed many, many years ago. Section 35. I'm not a lawyer. I don't profess to be a constitutional expert, but why are we in there? Why are we specifically named? Why is there Aboriginal and treaty rights reflected in this? The Constitution, a Canadian instrument, a tool for Canada, for its future. Why are we mentioned in there? It's not just by mistake. It's not because, we should put them in there now. No, because it's a reality. It's a reality, and it was understood that that should happen. The father of the present Prime Minister of Canada was forced into accepting that. And that's what is reflected in this day and age. Noel knows that. My good friend Gordon Peters was around during those times, and we've seen those things happen. We understand that. And this is why it's important to be able to talk to Canadians, because that's who elect the representatives of this country. It's important for them and their children to understand that. And in particular, there was a heavy emphasis this morning on the children. And that's right. The children, the young ones, should know and understand this and begin to make that an important part of their life. The young lady that spoke here just moments ago and quoted Chief Dan George about 100 years, O Canada. Very reflective and very true. I hope she believes in that strongly, and I hope one day she'll have children that she will pass that on to. We hope that the educational system will be able to do that. We hope that the museums, all the cultural types of centers that are open across this country will understand that and begin to make it living and real. And it's not just something that historically is dead. The past is the present is the future. That's the way we live. 7 generations in advance is what we look at. We don't just think about today, we think about the future. We have to strike this even balance between ourselves and the younger brothers and sisters that are here. There has to be a common understanding that we shouldn't be at odds with each other. We're not here to take anything away from anybody. My God, there's been enough that's been taken from us over time that we should realize, it should be realized that there is a special place for us here, and there is a special place for our brothers and sisters who have come here centuries ago. And, you know, when you look at Canada, they say, well, Canadian culture. Well, what is Canadian culture? Can anyone stand up and explain to me what it is? I can explain to you what my culture is, Mohawk culture, but can we explain Canadian culture? Is it Canadian Tire? You know, and I don't say that as a slight against anybody, but that's the kind of reality I like to strike with people to get them to understand the importance of our existence here and our continued existence. And if we were meant to disappear, if the residential school system was meant to take us away and do away with us, well, it hasn't worked. I think somebody mentioned that earlier this morning, or I heard it last night at another event. I'm not sure where. Well, that didn't work. It caused us some disruption that we're still feeling in this day and age, but we're still here. I'm still up here talking about this piece of our history, of our relationship, and I'm going to make sure that a lot of our young people, our own people, will continue to believe in that. And that'll become the way that we will live together with Canada, with Canadians. It takes courage and creativity. You have to have courage to be creative. And that's what we're saying to Canada. That is going to be the buzzwords of the future. Courage and creativity. We have to have those things. We also have to continue to be courageous and be creative in order for us to continue to survive as who we are. And if you look at, there's one thing that doesn't stand out as far as I'm concerned in the TRC, with all due respect, and that's a great document. It was a lot of hard work, a lot of emotional work that went into that. There's one thing I believe that's missing, is that nobody knows exactly the figures, the number of people that died, the number of our people that died in those concentration camps, I will call them very bluntly. And they were work camps too, let's never forget, is that thousands of people died. And imagine if those thousands of people had been able to survive, how many more generations of our people would have come out of that? Those are gone forever. And that should never have happened. So we lost more than the thousands of people. We lost perhaps hundreds of thousands of people. That's what we need to understand that happened with the concentration camps that were created by Canada. And make no mistake about it, regardless of whether it was the Jesuits, regardless of whoever pulled the trigger to do this, whoever came up with the idea and how to implement it, it's all right across the board. Everybody's responsible for it. And those brave young people who were drawn into this, who were stolen, who were taken from their homes, from their families, to lose all the things that they lost, including their lives, you know, we have to commemorate that. We have to take the time, as much as there are other Holocausts that happen in this world that people remember, we must continue to remember that. We must continue to look at this and say, we're going to take back our children, because, as was mentioned earlier on, that this still continues to this day. It still continues to this day. Our children are taken away from us by outside agencies and gone somewhere. We have to bring them back. We have to make sure that they're ours, they're part of our nations, and we're responsible for that. We have to put laws, we have to put our own things in place that will not allow or permit. If we have to move in and help, then we do that through our own, setting up our own types of forms of systems, which we always did in the past. We always did that when there were problems within families. We took care of those things, and we've grown too accustomed and maybe dependent on outside agencies to immediately, if we have internal problems with our families, oh, somebody else has to take care of that. Well, damn it, we got to take care of that. That bad little kid isn't such a bad little kid if we pay attention to that child and make sure that child understands right and wrong so that they become good citizens of our nations. Excuse me. Instead, we turn to other organizations to take care of that. So we have to look internally at ourselves. I'm not one for pointing fingers and saying, well, you, the government of Canada, or whoever it may be, you have to recognize TRC. All the recommendations are in there, and it's good to know that there are many recommendations, but it's also our responsibility to put those things in place, because if we just wait for somebody else to do it, they are not going to do it. They are not. We have to do that. We have to collectively come together as much as possible, work together to make sure that this takes place. The AFN and other organizations cannot do that. It's the people on the ground, the people in the background. And that's not a kick at the organizations or anything. It's just plain and simple. In our backyards is where these things need to happen. Another part of all of this is our own economic development, our own ability to create and generate wealth amongst ourselves, both public and private, to reopen all of those trade routes, nation to nation, east, west, north, south, to be able to do our trade and commerce. Because underneath all of that, all of the jurisdictions that have been stacked on there, provincial jurisdiction, federal jurisdiction, municipal, rights of way of different utility companies and all of that. And in the States, it's the same thing, is our jurisdiction, our right to use the land as need be. And we have the added advantage in this day and age of using the telecommunication system, all of the modern IT systems that are out there to be able to cause this to happen in this day and age. So we have to be far-reaching, much broader thinking has to take place, utilizing all the modern technology that's there, and to re-envision those major trading routes that we had at one time between nation to nation to nation, right across the country, down into what is now known as the United States. So I'm getting a signal here. Time is about due, but hopefully I've been able to pass on a little bit of information, some of the things that I believe in, and hopefully reflective of where we're going to go in the future. Yawako.